Yesterday, the Salvation Army released a new report on the state of the Pacifica community in New Zealand. More than churches, rugby and festivals shows they've been hardest hit by the recession, with higher unemployment and debt, lower incomes and growing inequality with average New Zealanders. Our guest today is the CEO of Mangere budgeting service, Darryl Evans, who spent the last 12 years helping people in the South Auckland community overcome financial hardship. Darryl, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme today.
You're very welcome.
The Salvation Army report, which has just come out, says that the Pacifica community is pretty much at the bottom of the food chain. Now, you've been working in that community. Is that your experience?
Definitely. I mean, for 12 years I've managed Mangere budget and family support services, and traditionally Māori have been our number one user of our programs. A very close second, Polynesian community. Over the last 2 to 3 years we've certainly seen that turn, and now Pacifica families are our number one user. The reality is cost of living has gone through the roof and families are just doing it tough. So the good thing is that they're putting their hand up and they come into community organisations like ours and asking for the help that they rightly deserve.
Why has it changed in the last couple of years? What's been the reversal?
We've had a world recession. We've had high numbers of redundancies across New Zealand and in particular South Auckland. There's a whole heap of impacts. You know, social housing is problematic because there's not enough state houses. Private rentals have risen dramatically across the country, and in South Auckland they've gone as high as 18%. So there's a lot of pressures. Rents have gone up, power has gone up, food has gone up, petrol has gone up. In actual fact, I don't know anything that hasn't gone up. And so these impacts hit hard, and unfortunately a large number of our Pacifica families are either on benefits or they're on low wages. And you and I both know that the minimum wage, which is now $13.75, really doesn't cut the mustard. It's extremely hard to sustain a household and feed a family good, healthy kai.
Auckland Council's own Pacific Advisory Group says many families are struggling and are in the depths of poverty. When even the council says that's quite concerning, isn't it?
Well, it's been really interesting because over the last sort of 12 years, rarely have I heard governments use the word poverty. They'll certainly talk about certain communities and say that they're struggling, but the word poverty has sort of been uncommon. During the week of budget announcements, which of course was last Thursday, I actually heard Bill English use the word poverty in almost every interview that he gave. And the reality is we have got some appalling statistics. Between 240 and 270,000 children across this country living in impoverished homes, and yet there are terrible stats that 40% of those households, there's at least one adult working full-time. And so that, for me, just reconfirms that minimum wage no longer sustains a family. And one of the reasons that I've put my name to the Living Wage campaign is because $13.75 simply doesn't give you enough to survive. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. It's one of the reasons why we're now raising a generation of 2-minute noodle kids. And in actual fact, the livable wage, which is being proposed at $18.40, certainly would lift people. It certainly doesn't make them wealthy, but it does allow them to pay the rent, pay the power bill so you can heat your home and cook your food, and more importantly, buy groceries to feed your kids.
So, in an average family that finds itself in that situation, what's the practical appearance of what happens to them when they don't have that money? How does that? I mean, you mentioned the 2-minute noodle kids. I guess it's across a whole range of things.
We're seeing a whole range of things where we have families who own homes, which is a very small number. In our organisation, 93% are renters. Many in state houses, many in private rentals. Very often they're unable to sustain the private rental long term. Some real estate agents are telling us that some streets in Mangere are turning over 3 families in a 12-month period, which is awful because the one thing that our kids need is security of a home and security that they're going to be in a community for a length of time. What we're seeing is because you're unable to afford private rentals, families are a lot more transient. They're moving further afield. So in Mangere, which is becoming gentrified, as the airport sprawls and gets bigger, many of the workers want to live in Mangere, want to live close to the airport. So the prices are going higher. Demand is huge for rental properties. There's a lot of competition. It used to be if you went to rent a house, you know, maybe it'd be you and the landlord or maybe one other. Now, very many households, you go and look at the property and there might be 40 people wanting that property. Wow. And they're offering more than is being asked. So people can sustain private rentals. Certainly, we've seen huge numbers, and 69% of our families are now coming to us regularly for food parcels, or indeed going to work in income for food grants. And so being able to put a good, healthy meal on the table, essentially food insecurity is on the rise. And our kids are going hungry, there's no doubt about it. We're seeing children not going to school because the parents can't put food in the lunchbox. If you go to certain schools, and locally to where I work is Southern Cross campus, you'll see a lot of kids of all ethnicities walking around with the 2-minute noodles, and I mean raw out of a packet, just crunching away. You and I both know that they're unhealthy if you eat them all the time. And so families are turning to fast foods and takeaways because, for example, for $10 you can buy a fish and chip pack of 5 fish, a few dollars of chips, potato fritters and half a dozen sausages. And I'm not suggesting for one second that it's the right thing to do, but I understand that when you need to feed a large family, $10 actually goes a long way as opposed to being able to buy and cook healthy food.
Because you were telling me before we started that some people are now moving way out of the city, so they're moving down to places like Pocono or Pukekohe. Yeah. Because they can't afford to live in Mangere anymore. Well,
that's it. I mean, when I went to Mangere 12 years ago, a 3-bedroom property was around the $280 mark. Well, a 3-bedroom now is close to $400. A 4-bedroom is around the $450 mark. And if you need 5 bedrooms, then often it's $550 to $595. So the rents are extremely high. You've also then got to have 2 weeks bond, 3 weeks rent in advance. Some of the real estate agents charge you a letting fee. So often families have to find $2,500, $3,000 as a deposit, which is extremely hard. So more families are moving south. Pocono has been advertised extensively on the radio, wanting people to invest and build on sections. And as the word gets out, people are moving further south. And one family that I helped out of Mangere, at their request, they were paying $415 a week for a 3-bedroom. And they're now in Pocono and they're now paying $260 for a 3-bedroom. Yeah. The difficulty is if you work in, then of course it increases travel costs. In this instance, the family are not working, so actually they are better off. They've got more dollars left over to actually manage the whole household.
Are there cultural aspects to this as well? Are there reasons why it's tougher within the Pacifica community than maybe others?
Absolutely. Remembering that I'm married into a Pacific family. So the cultural word is fa lave lave, which is essentially looking after your immediate family and your extended family, both here in New Zealand and in the islands. And so there is an expectation that if somebody was to die, you contribute to the funeral. If somebody gets married, you contribute. White Sunday, there's a lot of cultural pressure put on Polynesian families. And I'm certainly not denigrating it. And for the most part, Polynesian culture is rich and vibrant, great food, it's just fantastic. But when you have a lot of pressure to give consistently, you're actually taking it out of the mouths of your own children. And it also goes to church donations, the church tithe. I'm a huge believer that if you go to church and you have a relationship with God, then you tithe. But you don't tithe at the expense of your own children going hungry. And so my mantra has always been that you gift when your own house is in order. So when the rent is paid, when the power is paid, and the fridge and the food cupboards are full of groceries. You don't give $100 on a Sunday and then come to a budgeting service or the Salvation Army and ask for food parcels. It's just bad practice. And the one thing that we have to do with Polynesian culture, Polynesian communities, Māori, and in fact every ethnicity, is we have to ensure and we have to lift people so that they understand financial literacy. New Zealand has some appalling stats on financial illiteracy, and people are simply making really bad choices, and they're living in high levels of debt, and that's another problem. the average beneficiary coming across our door is $24,000 in bad debt, and working families are often 35 to 55,000. And we're not talking about mortgages, we're talking about cars, borrowing money to fix the washing machine, borrowing money to send to the islands, weddings, first birthdays, Tongan culture, they put on a big bash. And even on TV last night, I saw that many European families now are spending in excess of 9,000 to 10,000 on children's birthday parties. And I've been guilty of wanting to give my kids the best birthday, but I've never done it at the cost of not being able to feed the whole household. Yeah. So it's about educating our community to make smarter choices.
So is that the solution? Is this at a state level that the government needs to step in and run some sort of education?
I think there's several things we need to do. These are my opinions, and they're not in any particular order, but number one, we have to have job creation. There has to be some real jobs out there that pay real wages so that people can see light at the end of the tunnel. They're actually lifted out of the $13.75 an hour. We need to have apprenticeships so that our youth can actively train and go into long-term and sustainable careers. The government has to invest in financial literacy. The big buzzword is, let's educate people. Well, the one thing that I've experienced with several governments is that the government expect essential services like ours to do an awful lot more. And what I've said for a long time, more actually comes at a cost. We're a charity, but we still pay $35,000 a year lease fees. We still have to pay petrol to get our staff into the community to do the work. We're paying PAYE, increased KiwiSaver. There's so many more increased costs now. So our service costs around $500,000 a year to operate, but the funding that we receive from the government is around $270,000. There's a big shortfall. It's extremely difficult to raise dollars through the philanthropic community. There's more organisations applying for a slice of the pie. And so an example is we employed a fundraising coordinator in January. Her and I have put in over 20 applications since the end of January. So far we haven't had one yes, but we've had 7 declines. We have to put more energy and more effort into educating people, especially our youth. We need to get them off the sofa. We need to get them down the job centre. We need to find them real jobs. But all of that comes at a cost. And so there does have to be some real social investment from the government into services like ours.
Darryl, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And that's Endzone Now for this week. If you'd like to give us your feedback on what you've heard, you can email us at endzonenow, all one word, at shinetv.co.nz. Now later this week, the Endzone Focus team has a special report on the Rangatahi, or Māori Youth Court system, with Principal Youth Court Judge Andrew Beecroft. But from us, until next time, ka kite.